Welcome everyone to this presentation by the Career Development Center on top interview tips. This presentation is broken down into 3 sections: before, during, and after the interview, so that you can know what steps to take at each stage to ensure that your interview is going to be as successful as possible. The first thing you want to do when you have an interview coming up is to research the company. Your goal is to find out as much information as you can. So the first place to look is going to be the company's website. Oftentimes they have an about the company section. You might also want to take a look at their mission statement. Your goal is to have a good understanding of what products or services this company offers, who their target audience or population is, so that you can seem like a well-informed candidate when you're interviewing. Another good place to look would be in the news. In the event the company you are interviewing with has been involved in the news at all, it's good to show that you are up on current events and that also you're invested in the company and keeping track of what's going on with them. Another great source of information is a website called Glassdoor.com. If you are not familiar with Glassdoor, it offers company profiles. It also often has interview information. So if people have interviewed there previously and left reviews on Glassdoor, you can find out things like what questions they were asked, how they actually got an interview. So it's a really great place to check out before you do an interview. Just as a note, if you sign up for Glassdoor, it is free, but if you use that .edu email address, you'll get 1 year of unlimited access to everything on the site. The next step in interview preparation is preparing for those common interview questions. These are the questions that you can anticipate getting almost regardless of what type of interview it is or what industry you're interviewing for. So one of the most common and often most challenging questions for people is, tell me about yourself. This is a challenging question because it's so broad. Oftentimes people aren't sure what kind of information the employer is looking for. So I recommend reframing the question. Rather than thinking, what is it they want to know about me? Think, what do I want to make sure they know about me? So this question really should serve as a summary of your education, experience, and your skills as they relate to the position. This is your opportunity to share whatever you think is most important. So really think critically about what is going to make you a good fit for the role, and that's how you want to approach your answer to this question. It is okay to share things of a more personal nature if it makes sense for the role. So, for example, let's say that you have traveled a lot and you visited many countries, and the company that you are interviewing with operates internationally. That might be something they might be interested in. So you could share that you have done a lot of traveling. It's not really professional in nature, but it could help to demonstrate to the employer that you could be a good fit for that organization. Sharing something like, that you enjoy watching Netflix, probably not going to be very helpful to the employer. So again, your answer should probably be primarily professional in nature. But if you do want to share something more personal, just make sure that it makes sense and it's going to help the employer to see that you are a good fit. Another common question is, why do you want to work for us? This question can be somewhat challenging if maybe the truth is that you're not particularly passionate about this specific organization or role, but they just happen to be the company that offered you an interview. So really your goal when answering this is to make the company feel special. You want them to feel like you have a genuine interest in working there. So start with trying to figure out something that makes this company a little bit unique. Maybe it is the population that they serve, and you're really interested in working with that type of population. Maybe it's a particular training program that you know this company offers that's very interesting to you. So do your research and try to pick out something that makes this company a little bit unique from other similar organizations. Another really common question is about strengths and weaknesses. Talking about strengths is a little bit easier for most of us. Just make sure that if you are sharing a strength with the employer, that you provide an example, paint a picture for them, and share really what you mean. So if they asked you about a strength and you wanted to say that your greatest strength is that you have a really strong work ethic, give them evidence. Tell them about how you have maintained a 3.4 GPA while working 20 hours per week, while also being the vice president of a student organization on campus. So just make sure to give them evidence for whatever it is that you're claiming. All right, so as far as the weakness question goes, this is a little bit more challenging. So first and foremost, when responding to this question, you always want to be honest, but you don't want to make the employer doubt your ability to be a good employee. So I recommend starting by avoiding cliches. The most cliche response to this question that I've heard is often saying that you are a perfectionist, that you are overly dedicated to your work. I don't recommend sharing that because it doesn't sound very authentic. Employers have heard that response pretty often, so I would encourage you to stay away from that. You also want to stay away from direct requirements of the job. You don't want an employer thinking that you don't have the skills or the experience that is required for the role. So make sure that you really steer clear of anything that is listed as a direct requirement. When you do share a weakness with the employer, you want to make sure that you talk about something that you are able to change. Usually, it's easiest to focus on something that is skills-based because we can always acquire new skills. You want to try to stay away from things that are more general personality traits because those are harder to change. And then lastly, you want to focus on how you have already been improving and how you will continue to do so. I think that's really what's at the heart of this question. I think employers are looking to see, how do you not let your weaknesses stand in your way? How do you overcome them and keep succeeding? So let's say I was going to talk about Microsoft Excel as a weakness. So I want to make sure it's not a direct requirement of the job, but once I've done that, my response to this question might sound something like this. I would say that an area of growth for myself would be with Microsoft Excel. I have not had the chance to use it yet in a professional setting. However, I have been exposed to it in a few different classes. And in an effort to really increase my proficiency with it, I've actually begun taking a course through LinkedIn Learning to help myself feel more comfortable using Excel. And I'm confident if given the opportunity to use it in this position, my confidence would continue to grow. Right? So you can see I addressed the weakness, but I really focused my response on what I'm doing about it. How am I changing and how am I improving in this area? All right. Next question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? This can be a little bit tricky if you really don't know what the answer is. It's okay to not know exactly where you see yourself, but you want to give the employer the idea that you do have some general career goals. So talk about the industry you see yourself working in. If you know the type of role you might want to be in that time, you can share that information. You can also focus this response on the skills that you want to develop over that time. Maybe you focus your response more on wanting to develop additional leadership skills and move into a leadership role within your organization or within your industry. You also want to try to avoid topics that indicate you're likely to leave the company. So you wouldn't want to tell the employer that in 5 years' time, you see yourself owning your own business and really working for that business full time, because that indicates to the employer that you're likely to leave the company. This isn't as critical if you're only applying for an internship, because there might not be that same expectation that you would stay with that organization for a long time. But if you are applying for a full-time role, try to avoid those responses that are going to make the employer think that you're likely to leave. And lastly, why should we hire you? Oftentimes, this question can feel a little overwhelming because we interpret it as, why should we hire you instead of someone else? In reality, we can't answer that question because we don't know who else has applied. We don't know what their qualifications are. So this is another question that I think is really helpful to reframe as, how are you qualified for this job? Go back to your qualifications, It doesn't have to be anything huge. It could be the fact that you're bilingual, and that is going to enable you to communicate effectively with a wider audience. Maybe it's the fact that you are already trained in a particular software that you would use in this role, so that's going to save them time because they won't have to train you in that. So going back to your qualifications and anything that sets you apart from another candidate. Okay, another type of question that you want to prepare for is the behavioral question. Behavioral questions are the ones that start with the phrase, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of a time when. So the employer is asking for previous examples to try to indicate how you would behave in the future. So the method that we recommend using when responding to behavioral questions is called the STAR method. So the S stands for situation, the T stands for task. So both of these fall in the category of background information, just catching the employer up on what was going on. A stands for action. This is what action you as an individual took to resolve whatever the problem was. The R stands for result, positive results or lessons that you learned. So let's take a look at some strategies for how to approach behavioral questions. First, consider why the employer is asking you this question. Employers ask you these questions because they're trying to assess certain skills. So give some thought as to what is it the employer is trying to assess. If the employer were to ask you, tell me about a time that you had to deal with an unhappy customer, they're probably trying to assess things like conflict resolution skills, customer service skills, effective communication. They might be trying to assess how you handle high pressure situations. So you want to make sure that the example you share demonstrates those skills in a positive way. I once worked with a student, we were doing a mock interview, and I asked her, tell me about a time you had to deal with an unhappy customer. She responded by saying that she had worked at a fast food restaurant and a customer's order got messed up and the customer is very unhappy, and ultimately she went and got her supervisor to deal with the customer. Yes, that's an example that answers the question. It was a time that she had to deal with an unhappy customer, but it's not a great example to use because she actually got the supervisor to handle the situation. So it's not showing off her skill set. In the event that you don't have a good example to share, you have a couple of options. The first choice is to provide the employer with the next best example you have. So, I was once asked in an interview, tell me about a time that you disagreed with a supervisor. So let's say you were to get that question, but you don't have a good example to share. You want to try to provide the employer with another example that still gets at those core skills you think they're trying to assess. So you might respond by saying, thankfully, I've had really great supervisors. I haven't had one that I have disagreed with in the past. However, I did have a coworker that I sometimes didn't see eye to eye with. And you're going to use that example with the coworker to still speak to those same skills of conflict resolution, communication skills, those types of things. If you are absolutely stumped and you can't come up with any relevant examples, then you want to say what you would do if the situation were to occur. So your answer might sound something like, thankfully, I've had really great supervisors. I haven't had one that I really disagreed with, but if that were to occur, I would reach out to the supervisor and I would try to set up a one-on-one meeting so that we could discuss the matter and make sure that it wasn't simply the result of a miscommunication, right? So you want to tell them how you would handle that if it were to occur. You also want to make sure that you are focusing the majority of your answer on the action and the results section. So in the STAR method, you want the majority of your answer to be in those two sections. Oftentimes people get caught up in storytelling, so they're giving really unnecessary details. You want to just give the employer the bare minimum information they need to understand what was going on. And then lastly, keep in mind that the result of your example doesn't have to be a positive outcome. If it is, that's great. But if not, it could be an important lesson that you learned. So the important thing when sharing examples is not that everything worked out perfectly. It's really that you learned how to handle something more effectively so that the employer knows that you can handle it in the future. So let's take a look at an example. All right, so let's say you're asked, tell me about a time when you had to deal with an uncooperative group member. This is a very common behavioral interview question. So notice how I've combined the situation and the task. I'm not giving a ton of detail, just the bare minimum information. In my business communications class, we were assigned a group research project. One of the group members was often late to our group meetings or missed them altogether. This was causing resentment in the group, and we were struggling to stay on schedule. All right, so there are the details the employer needs to understand the situation. Now I'm going to move on to the action. Note the fact that the action section starts with I. You should always speak in I statements because the employer is looking to hire you as an individual. Even if you're discussing something that was happening as part of a group, the employer is not going to hire the entire group. So you really want to focus on your individual actions. I spoke to this group member individually and I asked her if everything was okay. She told me that she was having car problems and that it was difficult to get to campus for our meetings. I recommended that we talk with the other group members to see if we could meet close to this group member's house. So there's the action that this individual took. Then the result. The rest of the group agreed to meet at a different location, and everyone was able to make it to the remainder of our meetings. We completed the project on time and earned an A. So we can see that this is a really positive outcome. Everything worked out. Maybe that's not really what happened. So maybe your result might sound something more like, unfortunately, even though the group agreed to meet at a different location, this group member continued to miss our meetings, and we were forced to turn in our project without that group member's contribution, and our grades suffered as a result. From this experience, I learned that when working with groups, it's critical to set clear expectations from day one. And if any problems occur, it's really important to address them as soon as possible. So that might be the outcome, the result that you took away from this. And that gives the employer the confidence that you'll know how to handle this type of situation effectively in the future. So if you want to continue preparing with some of those common interview questions, go more in depth with some behavioral interview questions, there's a couple of resources that the Career Development Center offers. So first is our Career Development Center website. It's careers.csulb.edu. So if you go under the Students tab and then under the Job Search Process section, you'll see I'm looking at the Interviewing for the Job tab. And under here, there's job interview tips, behavioral interview questions, questions that you as an applicant can ask the employer, thank you letter tips. There's also these videos. You can see one there on the biggest interview mistakes to avoid. So I definitely recommend checking out some of those resources. Another resource that is available to you is called Big Interview. This is a great tool that we are offering. So you're going to start by logging into your CareerLink account through single sign-on. So once you log into CareerLink, you're going to see the online tools section on the right-hand side, and underneath that, you'll see where it says Interview Practice/Big Interview. So you want to click there. You will need to register if this is your first time using Big Interview. It's very simple. You'll use your CSULB email address to register. You will receive a confirmation email. So you just want to make sure you click on that email and your account will be all set up and ready to go. So then you can log back into CareerLink and access Big Interview. So Big Interview offers several different resources. So I'm in this first section, which is the Learn section. This is where you can access a lot of curriculum to help you really prepare and think through how you want to approach the interview. So you can see there's a couple of main options at the top. If you have a lot of time before an upcoming interview, you may want to check out the Mastery track. This is really going to go into a lot of depth and detail and help you feel very prepared for that interview. Maybe you have an interview coming up in a couple of days. In that case, you're probably going to want to use the Fast Track. The Fast Track is what's going to help you get up and running very quickly. So obviously you can pick what makes the most sense for you based on how much time you have. Underneath, you'll see some other resources. The interview playbooks are resources that help you with certain interview scenarios. So there's an interview playbook for new graduates. There's one for ESL students if English is not your first language, and you can get some recommendations there. Maybe you served in the military and you're making that transition to more civilian roles. There's a playbook for that. Also playbook for those who might be a little bit more on the modest side and have difficulty speaking confidently about their accomplishments. So great resource there. You can see other resources here on other topics like the job search, negotiating the job offer, your first 90 days on the job. So that's all available in the Learn section. And then we come to the practice session, and this is where you can conduct virtual mock interviews. So I'm in the general section right now. You can see that there are options for the top 10 interview questions, also depending on if you're entry level, mid-level. So definitely I encourage you to take a look at some of these different mock interviews and practice on your own to become more comfortable. There's also options organized by industry. If anyone's interested in interviewing for a government role, they have government interviews. So definitely take some time and check out Big Interview to help you prepare. All right, so once you are prepared, or hopefully you're prepared, we are now at the day of the interview. So you do want to make sure that you are wearing professional attire. Your clothing will definitely have an impact on how the employer views you. So first and foremost, you want to try to know the company or industry culture and dress accordingly. Some industries are going to be more formal or more conservative than others. So, try to act accordingly and dress accordingly. When in doubt, always err on the side of more professional and more conservative. That's always going to be your best bet. You want to be sure to avoid anything too casual, too trendy, or too revealing. And I do recommend removing facial and body piercings and covering visible tattoos until you know what an employer's policy is. So I will say, if you are someone where, your piercings, tattoos, maybe hair color, you feel are really a part of your identity, and that's something very important to you that you want to be able to express in the workplace, then I would recommend that you show up to the interview based on how you would want to show up to work. Because if it's not going to be a good fit, it's better that you find that out earlier on. If you are more flexible with those types of things, I recommend playing it safe, again, until you know what the company's policies are. All right, so each of these pictures represents a different interview fashion mistake. I've seen these quite often, both for those doing interviews and also those attending job fairs. So I just want to pick out a few of the main issues that we've noticed. So in the first picture on the left, a few different issues here. Overall, the look is too casual for an interview. So we see she has her sunglasses on top of her head. Her shirt is tied up. It's a very casual look to it. And also her skirt is too short. This is a common problem I've seen. If you're going to choose to wear a skirt, it should be at your knees or maybe an inch or two above at the most. So again, we're always going for more conservative, more professional. Also, her shoes probably aren't the best bet for an interview. Something a little bit more traditional and closed-toed is preferred. All right, so we move on to the next image. So a couple key issues here. One is going to be the blouse is too low cut. So that would definitely be problematic. Her skirt is borderline. It's okay, but probably a little bit longer would be preferred. And then her shoes. These are not shoes that give off a very professional vibe. So I definitely recommend avoiding the platform heels. Go with something more conservative. Keep in mind, ladies, you do not have to wear heels. It's totally okay to wear flats. I really recommend going with what you're most comfortable in. All right, the next image. This is generally just too casual for an interview. His shirt is made of denim, which is a very casual fabric. He's got the sleeves rolled up. So I would say for most interview scenarios, this is just going to be too casual. Again, your interview is the opportunity to make a great first impression. So you always want to try to go for the more professional look. The last image we see here, he is wearing a suit, but there are a couple problems. First, the suit is very slim fit. It's really erring in the side of being more trendy rather than more professional. So you want to go with something that's a little bit more of a more conservative fit or cut for the suit. Also, he's not wearing socks. Again, we're trying to avoid any of the really current fashion trends and always stick with what is more professional. So while this may be in style, it's not going to be the best choice for an interview. So definitely wear socks. All right, you also want to make sure that you are showing up prepared for your interview. So assuming that the interview is taking place in person, you want to arrive about 15 minutes early. Make sure you know where you're going, leave time for traffic, for parking. The worst thing you can do for an interview is be late. So definitely give yourself as much time as you need to make sure that you know where you're going and you're going to be able to get there on time. I also recommend bringing copies of your resume with you, a notepad and pen. This will enable you to take notes if the employer shares any information with you during the course of the interview. You can also bring your references with you to the interview. You can also usually provide these after the interview if needed, but if you have them ready, I'd say go ahead and bring them with you to the interview. And then lastly, examples of your work if appropriate. So this depends on what kind of a field you're in. I'd say a great example would be if you are an event planning student and you have actual images of events that you have worked on in the past, that would be great to bring with you to the interview in a notebook to show the employer. So different students are going to have different types of work that they can share. But if you feel that there's something that would help the employer to see that you are qualified for the role, definitely bring it with you. You also want to make sure that you are prepared to ask good questions of the employer. This is really important because it shows that you are invested and you're taking this seriously. So I always start by asking students, what do you want to know? What information do you need in order to decide if this role is going to be a good fit for you? You do want to avoid questions that have to do with compensation or benefits. That discussion should really be happening after a job offer has been extended. So you want to avoid those. But outside of that, most questions will be okay to ask. Some samples here. Why did you choose to work here? Maybe you want to learn more from the person who's interviewing you about their view on the organization. You can also ask about the company culture. If you're interested in learning about longer term career opportunities or opportunities for promotion, you never want to use the word promotion, but an appropriate way to ask that question would be, what is the natural career progression for employees with my skill set? That way you let the employer know you're interested in staying with them long term and you're interested in knowing what that might look like. My favorite question to ask during an interview is, what qualities do you think someone needs to excel in this position? Because I think that based on how the employer responds, it can give you a lot of information about what that role might be like. And then lastly, I do think it's helpful to ask, what is the next step in the interview process? That way you have some information about what that's going to look like moving forward. I do recommend preparing about 5 questions in advance of the interview, but you only want to ask maybe 2 or 3 of them. The reason that I recommend preparing more in advance is that sometimes your questions get answered during the course of the interview, and you don't want to get stuck trying to come up with more questions on the spot. I also recommend writing them down. As I mentioned before, it's a great idea to bring a notepad with you to an interview. So go ahead and write those questions down, and you can actually pull out the notepad and reference that when it's time for you to ask your questions. All right, so now that the interview is done, there are a few things you want to think about afterwards. You want to be sure to follow up with a thank you email. So at the end of the interview, ask for the interviewer's business cards. If they don't have business cards with them, ask for their names and email addresses. And you want to send a thank you email within ideally 24 hours of the interview, but up to 48 hours is acceptable. I do recommend sending an individual thank you email to each person if there were multiple people that were on the interview panel. So if possible, it's just nice to personalize each of them. And in the email, you want to reiterate your interest in and qualifications for the position. It doesn't need to be something super long and extensive. It really is an opportunity just to thank the employers, for their time, but also remind them of a few key qualifications. So here we have a sample thank you email. Yours doesn't have to sound exactly like this. This is really just to give you an idea of what it might sound like. So dear Ms. Ortiz, Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me earlier today. I enjoyed learning more about all of the Orange County Office on Aging's amazing programs, and I'm confident that I'm an ideal fit for the health education intern position. I believe that my coursework in health science has provided me with the necessary knowledge to design effective health programs, and my 2+ years volunteering with Meals on Wheels of Long Beach has helped solidify my desire to continue working with older adult populations. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Right? So nothing super extensive, just an opportunity to thank them and reiterate why you're a good fit. I wanted to finish off with these red flags provided by careerbuilder.com. They did a survey of employers and asked them to indicate the worst offenses committed by recent graduates during interviews. So I share this information just so that you know some things you want to be sure to avoid. So number 1 was acting bored or cocky. It's obviously great to come across as confident during the interview, but you want to be careful that that's not crossing the line into seeming cocky or like you feel like this is a waste of your time. Number 2 is dressing inappropriately, which we already covered. Number 3, inadequate preparation for an interview. 4 was cell phones and other electronic devices. I strongly recommend trying to leave your phone elsewhere if you can during an interview. If you can't, be sure that it is turned off. You really don't want that disruption during your interview. Number 5 is not asking good questions. Number 6 is unprofessional. Oops, sorry about that. Unprofessional online content posted through social media and blogs. So keep in mind that employers do Google candidates sometimes. So if anything can be found on the internet that's not going to paint you in the most professional or positive light, you want to make sure that you change your settings, that you delete that content. I always recommend Googling yourself, see what comes up. Number 7 is not sending a post-interview thank you note, which again we covered. Others noted, a few other considerations, discussions about compensation before a job offer is extended. Again, you want to delay that conversation until after you've actually received that job offer, if at all possible. And then lastly is repeatedly spamming employers with your resume and cover letter. It is good to follow up, but you also want to be thoughtful. You don't want the employer to feel like they're being harassed. So just be very aware, and if you're feeling unsure about, when is appropriate to follow up, or really unsure about any elements, keep in mind that the Career Development Center is always here to help you. You're welcome to schedule an appointment, and we can talk with you through your interview preparation process and really address any questions you have. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I wish you all luck on any upcoming interviews.